Hey, here's something. Joe Morgan wrote a letter to the baseball writers today about Hall of Fame voting, basically pleading that anybody attached to steroid use not get in. And lots of writers on Twitter seem to be offended by this, hearing the word hypocritical a lot and mentions of greenies, amphetamines, etc. Sweeney, what did you think of that?
To me, it's not so much about hypocritical. It's that I know several of the people who vote have Hall of Fame votes, and I asked a bunch of them today. I said, do you really care? Is this going to affect your vote in any way? And every one of them said no. I mean, I think they all appreciate Joe Morgan's history and his status in the game. But getting a letter from Joe Morgan telling them who to vote for, who not to vote for, is really not anything they're interested in. They do their own research. They do their own voting. And just because Joe Morgan asked them to do this doesn't mean any of them are really going to listen to it.
And one of the things that got people fired up, though, is that Joe Morgan's attended multiple events with Pete Rose, and there's that whole thing where he seems to be okay with that and not okay with this. Where do you stand on it, Nelson?
Well, I think, again, you know, a man who's already in the Hall of Fame, he can voice his opinion all he wants. He can say whatever he wants, and he could try and push it back. What's the inevitable is that the steroid era existed. You cannot sit around and say 15 years of baseball just did not exist. I understand the inflated numbers. I understand how he feels they cheated the game. I played in that era. I had to deal with it on a nightly basis, so I understand it. So the easiest thing to do, you make a wing of the Hall of Fame and call it the steroid era. Doesn't say that they did it or they didn't do it, but they did play in that era, and they put up those monstrous numbers during that era. Now, I understand that people are going to go back and forth about it. My biggest thing is you can't compare amphetamines to steroids. There's no way to go and say, oh, you guys took amphetamines because, you know, you were staying up late at night. We know what the guys in the 80s did and the guys before that did and how bad they were at taking care of their bodies for the game. The steroid era happened for a reason. Guys wanted to get bigger, faster, stronger, hit more home runs.
And paid more.
And it happened. And the commissioner of baseball let it happen. The Mitchell report came out, and there weren't slaps on the wrist. There wasn't suspensions right away. Baseball loved the new offense, and they wanted to see home runs hit. The Sosa-McGuire contest that was going on, it was great for baseball. So you would have to do it, and eventually, I don't think Joe Morgan is the guy that be the top of it to make somebody sit at home, a writer, and say, you know what, I think he's right. Let's keep these guys out a little bit longer. Those older guys are going by the wayside. Numbers are stacking up, and there's other ways to get in.
By the way, it's a little too late. I mean, there are likely guys in the Hall of Fame already who have used steroids. So, I mean, I see them. And I think you have to separate the two. Barry Bonds is the best player I've ever seen in my life. I don't care what steroids he did. Before steroids, he was the best player I've ever seen. Sammy Sosa was not a good player, took steroids, and then elevated his level of play. So if it's me, I'm voting for Bonds, but not Sosa. You are a Hall of Fame player or you aren't, even when it comes to steroids. I think you just have to use your discretion. I know it's a fine line. It's hard to say, but I think you can tell. Palmeiro, to me, not a Hall of Famer. He was a product of steroids. Again, Bond's the best example because he's the best player I've ever seen.
And I like Nelson's idea about the Hall of Fame with the steroid wing. It sounds like Tomorrowland at Disney World. Welcome to the steroid era, kids. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, you have right now in baseball the all-time hits leader, who's not going to be in the Hall of Fame. All-time home runs leader, not in the Hall of Fame. Clemens, third in strikeouts, not going to be in the Hall of Fame for all intents and purposes. But let's not just stop at that, because you have a guy that they put in the Hall of Fame just a couple of years ago in Bud Selig, who turned his cheek to while all this was going on and was basically enabling this because all the owners' wallets were getting fat. So why don't we then go kick him out of the Hall of Fame if you want to keep the steroid guys out?
Here's what I'm confused about, though. This idea of a wing or putting it on the plaque that he was in the Mitchell report or was named, there was suspicion. Where do you stand on the induction ceremony? Where do you stand on the day that's announced? How do you make it sound bad when something so great happens to these guys?
I think that's the thing that Morgan is really trying to avoid, is to have somebody up there that has either admitted to cheating or been tested positive, and he stands up there with all these other guys, and he's part of their club. We're all together now. I think that's what he's trying to avoid more than anything else. But listen, I just don't think there's any great way of solving this debate. People I've heard forever now who are proponents of Bonds or Clemens, and they say the writers are keeping them out. The writers are keeping them out. 50% of the writers have voted for these guys. It takes 75%. You can get presidents elected for what Barry Bonds is getting vote percentage of. It's just a much higher standard, and it's impossible to get 3/4 of the people to agree on it.
Another interesting point that I saw Joel Sherman make was that there's a reason Morgan's coming out now and saying it. These guys are getting more and more percentage every year. It wasn't at 30%. This wasn't all happening. Dan, really appreciate you coming on.